Back in February, a former caseworker at a pediatric gender clinic in St. Louis wrote an expose in Barry Weiss's Free Press, revealing what she described as something of an inversion of the Hippocratic Oath at the facility, hastily pushing kids into transgender quote-unquote treatment, anatomical and physiological alterations and interventions, with little concern for the risks. Whistleblower Jamie Reed said instead of doing no harm, the Washington University Transgender Center at St. Louis Children's Hospital was doing catastrophic harm, in which she could no longer participate, permanently damaging young, vulnerable patients in their care with hormone prescriptions and other interventions that can result in sterility, among other very serious consequences. The piece is long and detailed, but the central allegations are these. This clinic was prescribing hormone replacements for kids with little serious evaluation of what was actually wrong with these kids, if anything, little concern for what damage was being done to them as a result, and even less concern if these kids or their parents changed their minds and decided that transitioning was actually a mistake. In addition to description of her own experiences, Jamie Reed provided some examples of email correspondence during her tenure with the clinic to support her claims. Of course, that piece was immediately debunked by the child transitioning powers that be. If she didn't get away with asking these questions in the workplace, well, she won't get away with asking any questions in the public debate either. And so within a few weeks, the St. Louis Dispatch published a response piece, "Parents Push Back on Allegations Against St. Louis Transgender Center." And that is exactly what we were all supposed to believe. This is just an organic response from all the many parents who had an excellent child transitioning experience at this clinic, and not an activist effort at damage control. This response piece featured the commentary of Kim Hutton, a mom who says her teen daughter, she calls a son, had a great experience. And the idea that nobody got any information, that everybody was pushed toward transgender interventions, that is just not true. It's devastating, and she's baffled by it. What the piece doesn't mention is that Hutton is an activist who helped to create the clinic in the first place. She co-founded Transparent, an advocacy group for transgender interventions for kids. A very ironic name, considering that role was not at all transparently disclosed in this story. But on their website, Transparent and Hutton personally described the achievement of, quote, successfully lobbying for the Washington University Transgender Center of Excellence, which opened in 2017. This is an activist with a public agenda and a stake in public opinion about it. This is not just some parent who kept an open mind about the best course of medical treatment for her kid. This is a person with an established business interest in getting you to believe a particular thing about it, and the objective newspaper didn't see fit to disclose that conflict. Oh, but the Dispatch piece says Hutton is just one parent among a group of almost 24 who say that this clinic is great. Okay, sure. Go on. Who are these parents? Oh, well, they spoke on the condition of anonymity. To protect their children. Oh, wow, what a very convenient time to start protecting their children. But hey, good for them. Better late than never, I suppose. Or maybe not, actually. On second thought, abandonment might actually be better parenting in this situation. Regardless, the story is back in the news this week because for the last several months, the New York Times has been investigating the case itself, reviewing documents and speaking with staff, parents, and other involved parties. And on Wednesday, the Times published a story that predictably obscures and softens the facts into ambiguity, but at least the facts are there if you read it. How a Small Gender Clinic Landed in a Political Storm is the title of the piece, as though the political storm is the substance and not the actual activity at the clinic. But hey, the subtitle describes some of the details that matter. Washington University's Youth Gender Clinic in St. Louis was overwhelmed by new patients and struggled to provide them with mental health care. Oh, did they struggle to provide necessary resources? Well, that is very interesting. So, to elaborate on the premises here, demand for these transgender interventions for kids surged, This facility was not prepared to evaluate what sort of mental conditions were behind that demand, so what did they do to address that issue? Well, since the clinic's psychologists were so overbooked, they relied on external therapists with little experience in gender issues to evaluate young patients' readiness for hormonal medications. Doctors prescribed hormones to patients who had obtained such approvals. Even adolescents whose medical histories had red flags. Some of these patients later stopped identifying as transgender and received little to no support from the clinic after doing so, according to the New York Times investigation. In other words, this was just handing out hormones without the psychological support to oversee it, to the extent that the psychological support even improves or justifies such a thing anyway. But in one of the more compelling pieces of evidence that the Times uncovered, an email describing a conversation between ER nurses seeing increased minor transgender patients and a gender clinic nurse, the ER nurses were critical that patients aren't required to continue counseling, as in to see a psychologist to continue using hormones. The ER nurses were concerned that, quote, no one is ever told no, as in, per the original whistleblower accusation, if you want the hormones, you're going to get the hormones. You might even have them pushed on you, like this is some kind of street corner drug hustle, not just because of the ideological inclination to do so, but because this clinic doesn't even have the staff on hand to tell you no anyway. And if you're skeptical of the email evidence, you can find some more evidence in just the premises of the story too. The story says that as demand for transgender interventions for kids increased, more patients arrived with complex mental health issues. Documents reviewed by the Times show staff grappling with whether children's gender distress was a cause of the mental health problems or a consequence of them. Yeah, chicken, meat, egg. Are these kids having mental health problems because their gender issues are untreated, or are the gender issues just a manifestation of existing mental health problems? It is crucially important to answer that question correctly before you start aggressive treatment, because it's the difference between actually treating the underlying cause or just coddling and enabling and prolonging the symptom. And it appears the clinic was ignoring alarming trends in their patient demographics too, because for all the talk about the importance of equity, the clinic's young patients were, in fact, very gender disproportionate. In 2021, according to an internal presentation obtained by the Times, the clinic was aware that 73% of new patients were young girls. So it is nearly 3-to-1 girls to boys claiming to be transgender at this clinic, and apparently we're supposed to believe that there's something inherent about biological femininity that causes that, and then reject inherent biological femininity entirely to say that these girls are actually boys and not female at all, because of course there is no such thing. Or more plausibly, the reason girls are more susceptible is because it's the same sort of social contagion we've seen afflict young women with eating disorders and other problems commonly. Okay, but maybe this is all just a big misunderstanding. Maybe the doctors and staff at this clinic are being balanced and fair in describing treatment options to parents, and parents are so commonly selecting gender transition because it is the most medically sound approach, overwhelmingly. Well, if these doctors and staff are supportive of all patient decisions, why aren't they supportive of all patient decisions? Why did they suddenly stop caring when the gender transition decision was abandoned? According to the whistleblower Jamie Reed and the nurse she worked with, Karen Hammond, the clinic had no system to keep track of patient outcomes. The outcome did not matter. It was just the initial gender interventions that did. So Reed and Hammond kept a private spreadsheet reviewed by the Times, which they called a red flag list. This list was 60 adolescents with complex psychiatric diagnoses that were given gender interventions as treatment, with many eventually abandoning the gender transition process altogether. Reed and Hammond tracked 16 patients who detransitioned entirely. One of these patients was seeking a voice coach to deal with her newly masculinized voice. Another requested a referral for an autism screening. Another had a mastectomy and regretted it and was requesting help in building them back. This patient received no reply from the clinic. And the person requesting an autism referral said the request went nowhere. And one other now 21-year-old patient who was quote-unquote treated at this clinic starting at age 15 posted a warning on Reddit about this clinic's operation. She said that she originally sought help for bipolar disorder and anxiety. She was prescribed testosterone after one appointment without speaking to a psychiatrist or a second therapist or a caseworker. She took the hormones but quit 3 years later. Once she did, her nurse said, "No need for any follow-ups. Good luck. We'll see you never." This patient tells The Times there was a major lack of care and consideration for her. So it would appear the evidence is solid and growing, not just at this particular clinic, but across the industry too. This whistleblower says, hey, we are way too quick to put kids on life-altering hormones. So the New York Times investigates and finds several of these kids and their parents who agree, yeah, we were way too quick to put kids on life-altering hormones. And as the Times story notes, several European countries that started this child gender transition approach are now restricting it, steering patients toward mental health treatment and not hormones while more data are collected. And even the American doctor who imported these child gender transitions to the US is now herself saying, okay guys, chill out. Maybe not all of these kids are trans. Maybe they're just, well, kids, as in confused and anxious by nature and just in need of a little time and support to reach maturity, not Frankenstein operations from predatory activists. And like the law is adjusting in Europe, it's adjusting in the US too. Partly in response to this story, the state of Missouri banned these transgender interventions for minors, including hormones. That law is set to take effect Monday, August 28th, though there is an ongoing court battle that may result in a delay. But assuming this law stands, the clinic at the center of this story will not be enrolling any new patients, at least for these particular services. And of course, once the precious science turns and the law turns, the activists can turn only to their first and last desperation, the smear. In reaction to the Times story, GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, condemned the biased anti-trans piece. It's nothing but debunked lies from an anti-trans extremist. What a hateful transphobe this whistleblower is. Of course, it's awfully ironic to see the Alliance Against Gay Defamation engaging in gay defamation. As desperate as they are to inject and chop up the kids, they're even more desperate in their smearing. This woman they're calling a transphobe is gay and literally married to a transgender man, as in a woman who calls herself a man. Whistleblower Jamie Reed is a self-identified Bernie-supporting queer woman who came to this trans kid clinic after several years' tenure at Planned Parenthood. And despite that impressive career, she's still not good enough of a child chopper, says GLAAD. You gotta chop more, or be a heretic against the gay god. How far we've come now that child abuse is the litmus test for ideological purity. Even killing the kids isn't enough. You gotta experiment on them torturously to earn your legitimacy now. Very progressive indeed, if progress somehow means destroying our prospect for the future, our kids. But hey, it wouldn't be the only term completely inverted lately, and at least that's only metaphorical butchery. It's much more innocent than the literal stuff that they're doing otherwise. As always, their desperate allegation of phobia is only as valid as that which is supposedly feared. If you fear a nice sunny day or a tall, cool glass of water, sure, you might be a little bit crazy. But if your fear is for actual monsters observably on a rampage, well, maybe it's the monsters who are at fault in that scenario. And if you think the title monster is unfair or exaggerated, fine. I will stop using that term. When you guys stop hiding under beds trying to snatch up children. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel always. Appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below and especially over on Gab. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.